All right, everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. Tonight we have a small but mighty panel to look over a Contrarians Dark Horse album. We are looking at the one-off Tipton, Entwistle, and Powell album, The Edge of the World. Excuse me, no just Edge of the World. This is another Patreon suggested topic, although it happens to have been suggested by the legend himself, Mr. Marco, who joins us as a panelist tonight. Excited to have him on board. If you find this content interesting, check out the Patreon situation. It's a great community. We love to have you. Love your input, your votes on these topics, and your participation in the panels. Of course, like, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube thing. So this album has a bit of a strange backstory. So I'm just going to read the blurb that Glenn Tipton wrote when this album came out in 2006. It says, back in 96, when I approached Atlantic regarding my first solo album, that would be Baptism of Fire, baptism spelled with a Z, which always bothered me. The majority of the songs featured Cozy Powell on drums and John Entwistle on bass guitar. The label liked the material, but suggested that the lineup was a little old school and that I should work with some younger musicians and blend the new tracks in to give the album a more modern feel. This I did, as I had very little choice at the time, and in all honesty, a very good album emerged, which became my first release, Baptism of Fire. Deep down inside, I knew that this first batch of songs included some of the finest playing from two of the most talented and legendary musicians that I have ever worked with. Rhino/Warners heard the tracks and agreed that this album had to see the light of day. As Priest weren't active at the time, it was our intention to tour at some point as a three-piece, but fate played a hand, and tragically both Cozy and John are no longer with us. This album is a tribute to their unique styles and skills and a small part of the immense legacy they have left behind, which will continue to inspire people all over the world for many years to come. Now, we can discuss whether that actually applies to this album. I think that's where the meat of this discussion is going to come into play. So just for reference, again, these tracks were all recorded between 1994 and 1996. The album was not released until 2006. In the meantime, Cozy died in a car accident in 1998, and John Entwistle died the Dream Rock and Roller's death in 2002. I won't go into any further details than that. So we're going to open up the discussion with Marco. Marco, this was your idea. Tell us what you think about Edge of the World.
Thanks a lot, Reed. Thanks for hosting tonight, and welcome everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a very interesting album. To me, it's a very heavy album, and I don't necessarily mean musically. Although, I mean, there is heaviness in the music, like there's chugging guitars and things like this, but it's very heavy thematically and lyrically. I find for me, this album is a listening experience. It made me feel certain ways. I mean, certainly my first listen, there's themes about war, life after war, death. I propose there's themes about PTSD, although that's not necessarily like spoken about in the lyrics. But it's very tough subject matter to put into a musical form. And I believe that it's very successful in its attempt to do that in regard to like Glenn Tipton's lyrics. I mean, he wrote, I think, like 95% of the lyrics on this album, and I think they work really well. Even though they can be unconventional in spots, I do think that it's a very solid conceptual album in that regard, considering the way it was put together and how it was released. The production itself, the music production is fine. It's clean. It sounds the way it needs to sound. Like I listened to it through Spotify. It sounds good. In terms of like influences, I can hear a little bit of Ozzy No Rest from the Wicked here and there in the album. I hear some alternative influences as well in the album, which is good which makes sense because I mean, in the early mid 90s, that's kind of what was happening. I'm going to get into some of the things I really like about the album, but right off the bat, one of my biggest issues with this album is the vocals. So Glenn Tipton did the vocals himself. And to me, I think where the problem with that is it's such a powerful and heavy thematic album that I feel like if they had a powerful vocalist, like a David Coverdale-esque, not necessarily David Coverdale, but maybe if they discovered somebody in that vein who had a lot of balls in their voice, I think it could have pushed this album to the next level. I think Glenn Tipton's vocals are serviceable enough and they sufficiently work with the album's material. But I think it's the one thing that's lacking for me in this album, and I think it's a huge shame, to be honest. And I think if you listen to certain examples, like at the end of the track Holy Man, or at the beginning of the track Never Say Die, when he lets out that Never Say Die kind of scream type thing, I think that's where you can really hear the, I guess, weakness. Although I'm not putting his vocal, like his technique as a singer, down. It just, I don't feel like it fits the structure of this album, because musically the album is structured very well. There's a diversity of instruments going on. There's acoustic stuff, there's like keyboard arrangements, and they all fit together very well. Like, I don't feel like anything comes out of left field that sounds weird other than the vocals. And for me, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. So unfortunate, like it doesn't ruin my listening experience when I listen to the album, but it's something that's really at the forefront, because I feel like, yeah. And I get that this album is kind of a tribute. And I know that Glenn, maybe these lyrics were very personal to Glenn, and it's basically his solo album, right? Even though it says Glenn, Tipton, Entwistle, and Powell. I just feel like that's probably my biggest issue with it. Some of the guitar work, some of the soloing, I feel like could have been a little bit better. Some of it's, again, it's serviceable, but not super exceptional. There's some songs where there's hardly any soloing, but that doesn't bother me as much. I feel like the song structures and the instrumentation work really well within the album. I like the melodies. I like the songs. I like a lot of the songs. There's a lot of good songs on here. In fact, there's not really any weak songs on here, in my opinion. I mean, even for somebody who's more of a casual rock fan, or somebody who's maybe like an AC/DC fan or something like this, I could throw that. If somebody was in my car who was like a Back in Black guy or an AC/DC fan, and I threw on some of the songs that are on this album, like Resolution and Walls Cave In, like I can't see them not digging those tunes. Like they're solid rockers. All the songs are solid rockers. There's a lot of interesting things going on in here, and the musicians can certainly play, and the instrumentation's great. And some of my favorite songs, or some of the stronger songs, obviously Friendly Fire is an awesome opening track. I mean, there is Unknown Soldiers, the opening track, but it's pretty much one track. It goes right in, blends right into Friendly Fire, and I think that's an exceptional opening track. Edge of the World itself, the song, I think, is a great song. I mean, it's an anthem for the dejected. It's almost like the antithesis of like a hair metal anthem. Just an incredible tune. My favorite track, interestingly enough, is probably Searching, which is more of like a Black Sabbath Solitude kind of a acoustic song. And that's one of the tracks where the vocals don't bother me at all. I think everything works on that track. And that's probably my favorite on the whole album. Interestingly enough, although I like almost every song. The one thing I find interesting is the song that comes right after Searching, Give Blood. It comes out of nowhere, and it sounds like a hair metal. It has all the hair metal tropes. It's got like the gang vocal and even the guitars and everything like that. That one kind of sticks out, kind of like a sore thumb, but not necessarily in a bad way, because there's a lot of hair metal stuff I like, but it's almost like a Bon Jovi song. Like it kind of, musically, because the lyrics are pretty deep and heavy, but musically it kind of doesn't fit with the rest of the album, but I still don't mind it. Overall, I do think it's an interesting album, and I think that folks should probably go out of their way to listen to it if you're a fan of music, especially if you're a Judas Priest fan or a fan of like Powell or John Entwistle or anything like this. Another thing that kind of throws me off a little bit is the name of the name of the band. I mean, Tipton, Entwistle, and Powell doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, although I do understand that the album is more of like a tribute to the other musicians and not necessarily a group of guys trying to market themselves. So in that regard, that doesn't bother me that much. I guess at the end of the day, my biggest issue is probably the vocals, where like I really think if they had a vocalist to really push this album to that next level, like, I don't know what a 10 out of 10 or like a masterpiece album would be, but it would definitely be a 9 out of 10 for me if they had that vocalist. Otherwise, like, there's cool stuff. Like even on the last track, Stronger Than the Drug. like all of a sudden there's like a horn sound that comes out of nowhere that isn't heard anywhere else on the rest of the album, but it fits. And it's like, okay, I'm at the end of this album and I'm still hearing new stuff. Like that's cool. Like they definitely know what they're doing. They're definitely fine musicians. I don't want to put Glenn's vocals down that much, but to me, it's like it could have brought it up to like a 9 out of 10. So to wrap it up, I'm probably going to give it like, I don't want to be too harsh on it, but that's huge for me. I'm probably going to give it a 7.5 with the idea where it's like, if they just, it could have been like a 9 out of 10. And it's almost like when you have a kid and you're like, come on, I know you can do better. Like, I know you can push it to that next level, right? Maybe I'm being a little harsh on it in that regard, but it's an exceptional album. And I think people should definitely go out of the way to listen to it. I mean, like some of the songs, Never Say Die, has themes that I can identify with. I mean, you listen to the lyrics, too many stars that never shine, too many crash and burn, too many ships that sank in the night and never sail again. Like I can identify with that. So many people have so much talent and then they don't go anywhere with it, or they crash and burn or whatever. Holy Man with the lyrics about like, you know what I mean, death and this guy coming to give the last rites and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of really interesting things going on in here. So that's my call. It's a 7.5. I could probably give it an 8, but I definitely think it could have gotten to a 9.
Wow. All right. Excellent. Marco, do you mind kind of marking down people's scores as we go?
Sure.
All right. So if the panel doesn't mind, I'm going to go next, and then we'll have Martin go, and we'll let Pete bat clean up tonight. So I'm going to not be as charitable as Marco, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. So there are some really good things on this album about, the early 90s. The way I put it, on Painkiller, the guitar players in Judas Priest really leveled up. By the 80s, their technique as guitar players had been pretty left behind by the hotshot players of the 80s. Not that they weren't putting out great songs, they just didn't have the facility. And by the time Painkiller came out, Glenn Tipton is doing sweep picking and he's playing a hell of a lot faster and more aggressively. So he's really joined the times. People would argue, about 8 years too late. But nonetheless, it's that upgraded Glenn Tipton's playing that you get on this album. I think the guitar playing is consistently good. Now, by way of contrast with Judas Priest's output, I think Glenn is a soloist and KK is really the riffer. And I really don't think that the riffs are all that solid on this album, but the fills and the solos are pretty consistently good. And it's pretty much the same guitar tone that he uses on Painkiller. There is a surprisingly large amount of keyboards on this album. And as you listen to the album, my first thought was, I bet that's Don Airey. And sure enough, it's Don Airey because he played on every hard rock album that needed a keyboard player. And his contribution is so big that they should have included his name in the credits. I understand Marco is exactly right. This was a tribute album. It would not have been released if it were not for the deaths of Cozy and John Entwistle. And by the way, I forgot to mention the proceeds for the album went to the Teenage Cancer Trust, which I thought was very classy. But Don Airey deserved credit because he's nowhere to be mentioned, and there's so much keyboard on the album. On the flip side, there's almost no John Entwistle to speak of. The bass is mixed so far back, and it's so generic. The album is functionally guitar, drum, keyboard, and vocal. And I'm like, what did John Entwistle contribute to this? Well, he actually contributed melody on song number 4. We'll get to that in a minute. But other than that, it could have been any bass player on this album. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think that Glenn is a terrible vocalist. LA and London, I don't know where exactly they recorded this, but the UK and America are full of starving vocalists. They could have had anybody in to do vocals. I just imagine this album with a Glenn Hughes or a Joe Lynn Turner, or if you want to go down the ladder a rung, how about a Rob Rock? Imagine Rob Rock singing these songs. There are a lot of vocalists that could have knocked it out of the park. As a vocalist, Glenn's a pretty good guitar player. And his vocals are so distractingly bad that It's like as Marco's talking about the themes of the music, I'm like, I wish I could look past those crappy vocals and get to those themes because I never got there. His vocals just bother me that much, with the exception of 4 songs. However, there are 11 songs on the album. So that's 7 songs that I can't stand the vocals and 4 that are okay. So, very specifically, real quick, some songs, Never Say Die, sound so much like The Who. And then it turns out it's a co-writing credit with John Entwistle, so I was not really surprised. But it's so Who, and that is the biggest John Entwistle contribution to this album. Forget the rest of his playing, it's not there. I totally agree with Marco. That was in my notes that Searching, it sounds like the intro of a Black Sabbath song. Think the intro to Children of the Sea or the intro to Sign of the Southern Cross, just done as an entire song, or possibly a Jethro Tull type, sort of a pastoral song. And it is also my favorite song on the album. It's slower, and Glenn Tipton does his best vocal performance, possibly because it's a little slower, it's a little lower, he's a little more confident, and he sounds good. I have no qualifications about that song. It's my favorite on the album. Crime of Passion is his second best vocal performance, but that song is a Queen pastiche, and unfortunately not a great Queen pastiche. It's like Glenn Tipton loves Queen. Listen to the melodies on that song. They're very 1980s Queen, which is not where most Queen fans would have aimed for. And then you get to the last 2 songs, Edge of the World and Stronger Than the Drug. And there is so much in these last 2 tracks. They're so busy. There are layers of vocals, there's layers of guitars. And all of those layers actually diminish the impact of the vocals. And that's a good thing. That means that this track, or the album, ends with 2 pretty good songs. And weirdly, Stronger Than the Drug has the best bass line of any song on the album. The bass is up in the mix more than any other song on the album. And it's not John Entwistle playing. It's Neil Murray. So there you have it. It is an album made up of leftover tracks that didn't make it on Baptism of Fire. Some of the material is good. The playing is consistently good. The bass is non-existent. And I hate Glenn Tipton's vocals. I'm sorry, Glenn. You're a great guitarist. You're a terrible vocalist. And I give it a 6.
Okay. Well, okay, so I'll give you a little more background on this. So yeah, it's funny. I don't own a copy of this album, but I own the original bio, my signed copy of Baptism of Fire, 2 watermarked promos of Baptism of Fire, and 2 watermarked promos of Edge of the World. And I'm not done yet. We've got a little pile of Edge of the World stickers. So that's my chaotic version of this album. So recorded 94 to 96, 97. I guess, as that thing explained, if you go and actually compare the songs on Baptism of Fire, they're just more immediate, more hard rocking, more heavy metal songs, essentially recorded the same way. And I'm going to get into that. February 7th, 97, Baptism of Fire comes out. October 28th, 97, Jugulator comes out. April 5th, 1998, Cozy Powell dies. He crashes his car. His girlfriend calls him. She's distraught. He's driving really fast. He crashes his car and dies. July 31st, 2001, Demolition comes out. July 27th, 2002, John Entwistle dies. This is the hooker and blow, and cocaine in the hotel room. I think they're in Las Vegas, of all places. And then March 2006, this comes out. So let me just say a little bit about the production here. The guitar tone is so extreme and distorted and screechy. You really learn a lot about what Glenn Tipton likes here, because you somewhat get the same kind of sound on Jugulator, Demolition. This is Glenn Tipton and Sean Lynch. And Glenn Tipton and Sean Lynch are the production team on Jugulator and Demolition as well. Then you actually get the same strange, obscure characteristic of this production carried forward into Nostradamus and Redeemer of Souls. You don't get it on Firepower. That's more back to normal. But Glenn Tipton just has this bizarre, and I've asked them about it, and they haven't been able to articulate it to me. And I've even asked Richie Faulkner about it, and he kind of draws a blank on it too. But it's so distinct, and it's just very, very distracting on this album. So you get this screechy, almost like turbo synth guitar, turned up to 10 sort of thing. Don Airey's keyboards are braying. I agree, Reed. There's basically no John Entwistle, but I will disagree with you because Walls Cave In have a lot of John Entwistle type bass, and it's articulated and it's there and you can hear it. So you can hear it there. And I thought I noticed some of it on Resolution as well. And then Never Say Die, you mentioned the tie-in there, and then the gratuitous thing is the Bob O'Reilly sort of start to it on guitar, right? But you're right, a lot of the rest of it doesn't even sound like there's bass at all. And you can hear a little bit of bass, wow, 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 but you hear no articulation anywhere else. So I really wonder how much John Entwistle is on this thing at all. On the drum end, you know what? I'm going to leave the drum end thing for our drum experts. So I'm not going to talk about Cozy very much because I don't want to blab everything away. So I'm going to leave Cozy right out of this. But yeah, and Marco did such a great job on the lyrics. But what I find about this record is you're right, Reed. It's not very good riffs, and it's kind of in this weird meat and potatoes heavy metal zone crossed with a hair metal zone, crossed with a lot of Celtic stuff. I noticed what I found about this playing it again. I will get to the vocals too. Don't let me forget the vocals. But what I find is that I like almost everything on here that is not heavy metal or not trying to be heavy metal, because this sounds like a heavy metal expert making bad heavy metal, which is really bizarre to me. But I love Walls Cave In, Edge of the World, Stronger Than a Drug. So the last songs on it, I find them like epic and renaissance-y and complicated, and they fit a lot of stuff into them. So they're like big, dark power ballady type things, right? And then Crime of Passion as well, kind of like a Renaissance ballad there as well. Now, just to get to the one other thing I wanted to mention. So the reason Entwistle's there is that, you know, you've got Trinifold management with Bill Kerbishley and Jane Andrews, and they manage The Who, and they manage Judas Priest, and they manage Robert Plant, and a few other things as well. But so the last thing I want to say is on the vocal end, I found, okay, so the vocals are very inexact. They're pitchy, they're flat. He sounds drunk at times, like there's sort of a like bad intonation and bad phrasing, and he's just not very accurate. And he's got this strange voice that doesn't match the face, doesn't match what you think Glenn Tipton's going to sound like, right? So you're always off put by it. So Glenn Tipton knows himself he wasn't a very good singer, but it's kind of like, it just seems like a strange ego thing. Like, I'm the boss, it's my album, I'm going to sing both of these albums, and they're both deeply flawed because of that. But the one thing I will say is that is a super interesting voice. As a voice, it's really interesting, and it doesn't fit well on this material where everything is so loud. Like, everything is just, this is just loudness wars kind of stuff going on with like the production of everything is just braying, screeching like a screaming hyena coming out of both of these albums. So it doesn't fit this kind of music very well, and it's not very good. But it's such an interesting voice that I would love to hear that voice on something else. It reminds me of a completely undisciplined Steve Marriott in a way. He's got a little bit of that to this pinched, strange, nasal, high-ish, weird voice. But it is a cool voice. But yeah, everybody kind of said that about this record, that the vocals are pretty inaccurate. But they're also, there's also a lot of passion in them too. The way he's delivering these lyrics, I mean, it sounds like he really means it, but it does sound like he's sitting there sipping on some whiskey while doing it at times, right? It's just, he does not sound very good. So yeah, I found that all kind of funny about it. So yeah, I'll leave the drums. I'll leave Cozy for Peter. I'll just give you my grade, and I think I'm going to have to go 5.5 on this. Although Marco really has steered me a little bit. I loved his oration on this whole thing about the emotional depth and the themes and the war lyrics and stuff. I mean, I honestly probably would have come in here at around a 4.5. So I'm at least up to a 5.5 because of everything Marco said about this album. So there you go.
Yeah. I have to admit, I now want to find things in this album that I previously did not find. And I've got to go back and listen to that track and see if I can hear Entwistle's playing in it. It didn't grab me, but I'm willing to check again. Never let it be said I won't give a band that isn't Ace Frehley a second chance. Peter Jones, why don't you bring us home tonight, sir?
Good evening. 3 wonderful dissertations, and so I apologize for any repetitiveness or duplication or triplication in this that may happen here. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, I've got Glenn Tipton, I've got Cozy Powell, and I've got John Entwistle, and of course, Don Airey. I go, what could possibly go wrong here? Well, to my ears, just about everything went wrong. And what results here to my ears is something that's almost unlistenable. When I look at overall style, it's unbelievably confusing. What kind of album is this? It's all over the bloody map. And, 1 minute it's metal. The next it's got Warrant and Winger-like choruses, and then it jumps to pop. And as you've all mentioned, and I think you're all dead on, you throw in this Painkiller era tone that almost lays waste to everything in its path. It obliterates the things that are going on around it. It's horribly out of context with a lot of the songs. The melodies aren't strong, the choruses aren't strong, and even within the same song, styles don't seem to match up for me. When I'm looking at the production, this too is kind of a mess. And you've said it, anyone could have been playing bass. The keys are too strong in spots. A lot of the tracks are unbalanced. And because of the wide period of time that it was recorded, there's not consistency from one track to the next. They sound like they were recorded at vastly different times. Look, Cozy's drums at times are big, but man, there is nothing special going on here. He sounds really one-dimensional to me, and in a lot of places out of place with the backing material that he's playing along with. And some of the elements sound dated, and more specifically, Don's keyboard sound. When we look at Unknown Soldier into Friendly Fire, look, we've all mentioned it. Glenn's vocals are awful. I can get through Udo and King Diamond and Dave Mustaine and then Ace, and I'll even listen to Uli John Roth sing, but this is it for me. That kind of reaches the point. I can't do it. And when that guitar sound comes in, it just doesn't work. The track doesn't warrant a guitar of that distorted level. It's out of place, and as I said, the production just kind of falls flat on here. I'm listening to the beginning of Holy Man, and follow along with me here. I hear the intro keyboards, and all I hear is the intro credits to Escape from New York. In 1988, the crime rate in the United States rises 400%. It sounded like a dated 80s movie. And then you have these vocals that come in that aren't strong. The band comes in, and I'm like, oh, now it's metal. Cool. Oh, whoops. Just kidding. Right turn, Clyde. And now I don't know where it's going. Reed mentioned that his vocals just don't have the tonal quality, the thickness, the strength to stand up. So that's, we're not going to beat that horse. Never Say Die, of course. It's got the Who influence. It's a little better melody, but what's going on in the background doesn't work so great. A lot of hair metal stuff going on here. And in the middle, they got this ooh, ah. And I'm like, what is the point of that? That doesn't seem to fit. And the guitar solo is totally out of place for me. We get to Resolution, and this sounds like it belongs on Painkiller. And truth to my rankings, Painkiller is one of my least favorite Priest records, so that's not going to bode well for my ears. This one is one of the tracks that really could have worked well with a good singer. It's just kind of a flat track. It really doesn't go anywhere. It's kind of monochromatic and just kind of blah. The bridge is cringy, but I did hear a bass lick in there. So I was excited because I heard a bass lick, and so much so I had to actually write it down. Look, Glenn is a tremendous player. Obviously, there's no question about that. But these are some of the most forgettable solos of anything that he's done. This is kind of also similar to what shows up on the song Revolution from Angel of Retribution. There's a lot of similarities I hear there as well. And I'm going to echo my other contrarians here. When I went to searching, I said, finally, a song that works with Glenn's voice. And it sounds like it fits. It is my favorite track on the album as well. It's stripped down, and I think it is a better structure compositionally, and it's much more cohesive from start to finish. And as Martin said, his voice sounds like his speaking voice, and you go, that's the same guy. I don't know really sure who that other guy is, but this one seemed to line up. We get to Give Blood, and all I could hear is Can't Get Enough by Winger, but with a really bad singer. So I just said that one's dreadful. I had to move on. Crime of Passion, it's just sounds like a kind of a poor man's ballad from maybe like a White Lion or Extreme or somebody like that, or a really bad Dated to Be With You. Cozy sounds bored. And the drumming on this is just way out of place for me. It's just too big. It's just too huge. Walls Cave In. It's got, I think, the best intro, and the riff and the sound finally match up. And from that standpoint, I was excited and eager. And we even had our tritone in there of evil going on. So I'm like, okay, we've got some metal going on here. Start singing, and all the air leaves the room. And I agree with Martin. This is the first track I really hear some bass playing going on. And I go, only took 9 tracks and a snippet from a song a couple before. It's very repetitive. And the tracks are now starting to bleed together for me with a monotony and a similarity that is starting to diminish what's going on here. Edge of the World, I hear it's like they're heavy duty. Slow, plodding. It drags on. It's kind of lifeless and lacking dynamics. It is one of his better solos, however, which is ironic because there's something great, and now he doesn't have a track to match it up with. I also think it's a little bit too long. Stronger Than the Drug, more up-tempo, which is nice, but to me it sounded like a poor singer trying to copy Robert Plant or Billy Squier. It's got some Kashmir-like chordal patterns in it, but it just, the keys sound dated. Cozy's drumming's lifeless and uninspired. It's formulated and kind of boring. To me, it was an extremely disappointing record and not something I'll probably revisit. There's such great players, and I have such high respect for all 3 of them. But a musician is only good as the material that they have, and here the material was really subpar. And simply because of my respect for the 3 musicians, I give it a 3 out of 10. That's my rating for the 3 of them.
You can't add 1 for Don Airy?
3.5.
Yeah.
Well, if my informal math is anything, that puts us right about a 6 average for the 4 of us. So I think that what I'm hearing is we have an album here that had potential, possibly even some fantastic lyrics. It's got some really good or some really average. Glenn Tipton guitar playing, John Entwistle is non-existent, and I never listened to the drums, so I'm going to take it on Peter Jones' word that Cozy sounds bored.
Let me add one thing about the drums now that Peter's talked about that. So, I'm not a big Cozy Powell fan. There's not a lot of Cozy licks or albums that I like a whole heck of a lot. But here he's actually, it's funny. There are some places where his drums are just electro clatter treated, but not all over the place. They're actually they're actually treated with more sympathy than the guitars and the keyboards at times, which is funny. So he's there and he's doing stuff and he's doing fills and stuff. You know, you actually get a lot of cozy on this, and it sounds like cozy. Unlike Entwistle, yeah. Reed, you know, to be more specific, that Walls Cave In song. That's when you get to the verses. The bass is pretty naked in there, and it's pretty rocking, and it's totally John Entwistle sounding. So that is the one place. But yeah, he's not there. It's more Cozy Powell. And one more thing I want to say about the songs. When we talk about hair metal, it reminds me of the really badly out of place, clueless British hair metal. You know, Virginia Woolf and Air Race and Thunder and Little Angels and Princess Tang or whatever these other bands were from the UK who tried to do hair metal. It just does not. It sounds like that combination of old AOR from 80, 81, 82 combined with hair metal. You know, that Midwest sound thing with all those brain keyboards throughout. So, yeah, I guess that's basically all I wanted to add.
All right, Marco, I think we need to give you the last word, sir. This album is one that touched you deeply, the rest of us less so. So you have any last comments you would like to throw in?
No, I think everybody did a pretty good job at summing up the album itself. You know what I mean? Like, production has never really, to be honest, has never really been something that makes or breaks it, unless it's like, if the production's really bad, like on some old soundboard recordings and stuff like that, where you're literally only listening for historical value, right? Then it makes something for me unlistenable. But I mean, to me, the production, like I don't hear the guitar. The guitar doesn't annoy me that much. I agreed though that like, yeah, it's very, what I was trying to say was the solos aren't very exceptional. And some of the songs itself hardly even have a guitar solo in them, which is very interesting because it's a solo album from a guitar player, you know what I mean? So that's very interesting. The songs themselves, like I said, I thought all the songs were just fine. I think everybody's opinion everybody would have gave it a higher rating, like we all said, if there was a better vocalist. The vocals are too airy and light and whiny or weaselly, like, and it for this album and this subject matter, it for me takes a huge blow because of that. And I even feel like there's some kind of effect on his vocals. Like it's maybe a slight echo or something. It sounds a little robotic, or I can't put my finger on it. It doesn't sound.
That happens all
natural.
over the album because they're trying to fix it. They're trying to make it better, right? So they're trying to like not physically double it, but double it and echo it, and just try to, when he hits a note, when the note is good, they seem to accentuate it in place.
But it's interesting that you use the analogy that when that effect happens, it has a tendency to take a vocal out of phase. And when it's out of phase, you had mentioned that he sounded like he was drunk. And that's kind of what happens. The pitch has a just slight bend to it because it's being moved out of its original sine wave. So now it's got this weird thing going down it. And it does give this impression that there's this unstableness that's going on. Not that he's the most stable singer to begin with, but you make the two. You have an unstable singer with a vocal where the vocal's being treated. Now that's an even bigger problem.
Yeah. And there's also even like a slurring of words in parts of it, right? Where you hear like it sounds like he's got a mouthful of marbles kind of thing when he's singing, right?
Yeah. So
well, he's British, so I never just know if that's the way he enunciates. Sorry, British.
Yeah, so my final analysis is I think it's an above average album that could have been a really good album. Yeah.
It's funny, you know, one thing, if you got a super powerful, you know, hotshot lead singer with a lot of personality, and you had a label that wanted to just ram this down radio's throat, it could almost fit in the hair metal world, and you could almost eke a hit out of it somewhere on this album. But it's 2006. We're talking like this had to happen in about 1983. It's a Revolution by Night, Survivor, Shooting Star kind of album, almost, right? You know, Kansas in their commercial phase kind of album. So it's literally 23 years too late for that to work. But yeah, put that lead vocalist on it, and if somebody just decided we're just going to throw a pile of money at this thing, you could almost turn it into a hit in 1983.
That is
Did any of you
excellent
have a
point.
specific singer that was in your head when you were listening to these going, this guy?
No, I literally think almost anybody. Imagine a Roger Daltrey, or I love Revolution by Night as an example. Imagine Eric Bloom singing this, or even Buck Dharma. Buck Dharma could have done a much more coherent job than Glenn.
But to put it in that time frame, I would say like a Bryan Adams or a Steve Perry, or oh boy, who else? Kevin Dubrow. His voice sounds like those guitar tones and those Don Airy tones. He'd fit right in there.
I don't know why Jeff Scott Soto came to mind when I was listening to these, but that was just a personal thing that kind of jumped in my head. But at least he has the breadth of the bigger voice that could stand up to where that was going, at least in part. But
all right. Well, there's almost universal agreement that Searching is the best track. So if you want to check out this album, go to YouTube and look up Tipton, Entwistle, and Powell, the track Searching. It's good.
And the rest of the album will confuse you to death afterwards.
Yeah, but at least you'll get one good track out of it. I think we'll just call it there. We give it about a 6. Maybe check it out, maybe not. You know what? You could love it. Why not? Marco loves it. We should all love it. There's not enough good music in this world. And we will catch you the next time on the Contrarians.
All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
See you, everybody.
See ya.